with this idea, when you want to build an exchange on chain, completely on chain, you don't want to have any, off chain sequencer or any off chain, like centralized off chain components. You want everything to be fully on chain. You have a lot of underlying requirements. There's the obvious, which everyone's kind of aware about. You need a high throughput network. You need low latency. You need censorship, like very strong um, forms of censorship resistance. And then you need a very geographically diverse network. And SWI was able to provide us all four of these, which allows us to house this entirety of the exchange on chain.
Nothing said on 0x Research is a recommendation to buy or sell securities or tokens. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and any views expressed by anyone on the show are solely our opinions, not financial advice. Boccaccio, Ryan, and our guests may hold positions in the companies, funds, or projects discussed. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of 0x Research. Today I'm joined by Danny and Kevin, who is the co-founder and CTO of Aftermath Finance. Thanks for coming on, Kevin.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Before we get started, do you want to give a quick background on what Aftermath is and what you guys are building?
Yeah, sounds good. We're building Aftermath Finance. We're doing a lot of the DeFi innovation on SWI. So I think, yeah, we'll get into it. You need to know a bit about the SWI ecosystem in order to see kind of where we excel at and why we're building here. But we are building across a lot of the DeFi verticals with the underlying goal, right, to build the full decentralized exchange, right, the entire CEX experience, all completely on chain, all completely transparent, secure, safe, everything you'd expect with that vision. So everything from the core flagship product is fully on chain, order book based, perp exchange, and then accompanying it, we have a lot of what we call UX features, but these are also in their entirety DeFi verticals. So today, if you ever visited our site, we have our AMM, we have our DEX aggregator that sits on top of that. We even have some other adjacent features that kind of sit on top of that and provide UX features or other spot domains in itself. Then we have our LSD. But going forward, again, the core of our product is kind of this fully on-chain perps exchange. And then we've been doing a lot of research on MEV and SWI, which is a very new and exciting, somewhat new, I would say, but new and exciting kind of research area that a lot of people are starting to look into with the rise of SWI. And we've been doing a lot of research on that and DAGs and how that interplays. So happy to get into any of these pieces throughout this.
Perfect. I want to talk about all of those, but I think before we get started, I kind of want to take some time and talk about I want to ask you why you guys decided to launch on SUI, and because it sounds like that's a pretty big part of what Aftermath is and wants to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. We get asked that a lot. What I love to say is, if I were to answer that question today, it would be completely different. To an extent, it would be completely different from how I would have answered it. So we've been building on SWI since, before FTX collapse. Kind of took that out of our pitch pretty quickly. But we've been building since then, and the reasons we chose SWI in the first place, they're still there, but there are now a lot of new compelling reasons to build on SWI. And if I were to answer that today versus then, the answers would be maybe more refined today. But what initially brought us there was just the underlying, the tech. It was a very tech-heavy decision. So with this idea, when you want to build an exchange on chain, completely on chain, you don't want to have any off-chain sequencer or any off-chain, like centralized off-chain components. You want everything to be fully on-chain. You have a lot of underlying requirements. There's the obvious, which everyone's kind of aware about. You need a high throughput network. You need low latency. Like that. That's just the initial two things you'd want. You need censorship, like very strong forms of censorship resistance, and we saw that with the DAG, which I'm definitely happy to get into that. And then you need a very geographically diverse network. Right. If you're, Anatolios has a good example of this. If you're in Singapore, I don't want to have to send, a transaction to someone in New York. First, I want to be able to send it to a block producer in Singapore, someone, very close to me, 50 milliseconds away. So you need a very geographically, diverse network. And SWI was able to provide us all four of these, which allows us to house this entirety of the exchange on chain. I can stop there, and then there's a lot of more compelling features today, which I would also tackle on, but that was kind of the crux of the decision of why SWE 2 years ago.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think you know what might be helpful because you guys offer such a broad array of products. Maybe let's start off from the very basic, which is the perps exchange. How do the mechanics work on that side, and what does SUI enable apart from? So you gave a few options, but maybe clarifying why SUI enables you guys to build the perps exchange.
Yeah. Actually, let me start with the AMM. Everything is going to be generally the same, but the AMM is live today, and it's something, after hearing this, you could go play around with it and kind of visualize. You could actually see exactly what I'm talking about. Um, so again, some of the reasons I would mention, like why Suite today, is everyone talks about the developer experience. That is a compelling reason to attract new developers. But one of the good things about the DevX on Sui is its data model. I'm sure you've heard about this. It's object centric as opposed to being account centric, which most other chains are. This has a lot of different benefits. Some, around security, some just around your mental model of coding. But one is kind of the isolation you get at um, I guess the congestion level. So the correct way I would say to design really any DeFi vertical, but either perps or AMM at the crux of it, at the center of that, you have either the AMM pool, you have some market, right? You have some vault, you have some like central entity, and you don't want transactions that are touching one to have to interfere with transactions that are touching the other. If they're completely isolated at the transaction level, you don't want to cause congestion for a completely unrelated piece of state on the chain. And that's true whether you're talking about one protocol and then the different vaults, markets, pools, whatever within that protocol. And it's especially true when you're talking about, two different protocols, unrelated protocols, maybe unrelated domains. You have an NFT mint, you have DeFi, some DeFi AMM, like our AMM. Um, so you want that isolation. So SWI allows us to do that because of this object-centric data model. Um, at the center, you have these MM pools, and with this object-centric data model, you have some ownership inherent to them. And these pools themselves are shared, so anyone can interact with them to the constraints of the contract, of course. But it allows you to then interact with one AMM pool in one transaction, another AMM interacts with another pool in another transaction, and assuming there's no third transaction that touches both of those, let's just kind of throw that case out of there for the time being. You have these two completely isolated transactions. They're able to be executed in parallel, post, commit, post consensus and all that when they get sent to the transaction like execution layer, um, then they can be isolated or they can be executed in parallel. So that's like a very compelling reason to build on Sui in the first place. You also can then tackle on some concepts like a localized fee market. So if there is one piece of state that's causing, it's very hot at the current time, maybe like an NFT mint or a lot of arbitrage or something, or a new coin drop or something. Um, you do want fees to start rising there. You don't want it to take up too much, like CPU consumption or anything like that at the validator level. So you could have localized fee markets, tackled on top of this. And it's a very compelling reason. And with our AMM, we are able to isolate these AMMs at the individual like object level.
Perfect. And so apart from getting liquidity from your own AMM, you also have the smart order router, which integrates other pools. Why did you guys decide? So I feel like this kind of fits into the one-stop shop thing that you mentioned beforehand. But how does
Yeah.
this? I guess how do you decide on who to integrate? Where does most of the volume come from? Is it still from the Aftermath AMM or is it from different liquidity sources?
Yeah. So first, how do you decide who to integrate with? Um, Unfortunately, I'd say that's kind of chosen for you. When you run an aggregator, you are responsible for the integrations, and you just have to go where liquidity is, which is right now in Sui, there's maybe six dominant liquidity sources, spot liquidity sources. Now with DeepBook v3, we're getting um, another liquidity source and maybe make that seven. But right, you just have to go where the liquidity is. Where the user wants to trade something, you need to allow that. And then there's some like less obvious liquidity sources where maybe it's not an MM or an order book. there are less obvious liquidity sources that you can tap in. So that kind of grows the spectrum from, a solid 6 or 7 to like maybe around 13 today on SWI of liquidity sources you want to tap into. But it's very much a user wants to trade something, you want to allow that. You don't want them to have to fragment their choice of, I want to trade this very specific meme coin. It's on an AMM. This integrate or this aggregator doesn't integrate with it. So let me go to this other aggregator to trade this very specific meme coin and then come back to you for these other maybe blue chips or something like that. So it's very much user driven. We just want to integrate everywhere. And then we just go on say if tomorrow two AMMs came out and we had no idea they were being built, they just announced on the same day they launched, we would just go where liquidity is first and prioritize integrations that way. And then to answer the first or the second of the question of where do we kind of see our aggregator smart order router compared to our other products? And again, it's very weird to say this because on other chains, there are entire companies that is what they do. They build a DEX aggregator and they've made a business out of that. Jupiter is a very good example of that. Where for us, it is an entire domain, but we do view it as a domain. Of course, it has the priority of a domain. But it allows us to then build these user experience facing features. So I'll mention dynamic gas as kind of a poster child for something that's possible on SWI and something that we've then like layered on top of our DEX aggregator. And dynamic gas is this ability for us to simulate for the user, I want to pay gas in a coin that's not SWI. So maybe we initially built this for our LSD, afSUI. So we allowed our users to only hold afSUI and transact on Aftermath, with paying gas purely with afSUI. And under the hood, we're using our DEX aggregator to then route into SWI, and then you end up paying, we sponsor, we pay the SWI, but we're able to like repay using our DEX aggregator. So we have a lot of these user-facing features that you would want their day one. You don't want the user to have to hold a specific liquidity. Maybe you want that zapping functionality of when deposit into a pool, but simulate depositing some unrelated coin and then zap into a very relevant, whatever the pool's denominated in, zap into that and then deposit. There are a lot of these, user-facing use cases that we want, and the DEX aggregator provides us that. And then also it is a piece of the exchange, right? It's a vertical that you would expect. We want someone to be able to do all their transacting on Aftermath, and spot trading is very desired. So it's another kind of relevant feature that we need.
Makes a ton of sense. A recent like maybe launch of interest on SWI is DeepBook, and obviously they've had their token generation event lately. But DeepBook is kind of positioning itself as sort of a key or major liquidity layer for SWI, and SWI, dexes and products kind of across the ecosystem. How do you think that their product kind of will impact the ecosystem, and maybe in relating that to like Aftermath's model? Are there knock-on effects? Do you see yourself competing with their product, or is it really going to be a net benefit to you guys?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. So, and we're also in an interesting position because we are competitors with them. We're not. We are. It also just depends on what domain you're looking at, right? The obvious benefit is we're a DEX aggregator. We aggregate their liquidity. They have a lot of I think they're one of the most dominant, native USDC just launched 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. They're one of the most dominant liquidity sources of native USDC. Obviously, they're most dominant of deep, right? They have some of these more blue chip assets, and they have very deep liquidity. Um, I don't necessarily see them being the dominant for meme coins. So from the MM front, I think there's a lot of room to still capture some of that demand that you would expect from spot venues. Um, it does get a little bit tricky on the blue chip side, but I think there's always going to be some external demand outside of DeepBook. Um, and then on the AMM front, like we are at the end of the day, you do compete for liquidity. If someone wants to deposit, it's either us or them. So it really just comes down to the asset. And again, there's room for meme coin growth outside of DeepBook. Um, but I will say that with our AMM, we've designed it from the get-go, again, as a user experience facing feature. We envisioned, 2 years ago, we knew Wormhole was going to be there day one. And with Wormhole, this is less of a problem today since there is native USDC, But day one, there was a native USDC. You had all these different variants of wormhole wrapped USDC from Solana, from Ethereum, from Arbitrum, and at the type level, these were not fungible. You held, upwards of 5 different types of USDC wherever you bridged it from. But then two asset pools could only hold one of those. So if you bridge from Arbitrum, USDC bridge from Ethereum through Wormhole was the dominant kind of liquidity of Ethereum or of ETH. So if you bridge from Arbitrum, you couldn't deposit into that pool. You had to then swap into Ethereum bridged USDC or bridge back, go to mainnet and then bridge again, which either way, it's kind of a poor UX. So we kind of envisioned this problem. It was there with Wormhole, but you kind of zoom out. There's going to be Axelar, layer 0. Now there's the native bridge from SUI. You have that same underlying issue is kind of across different wrapped versions from these different bridges. So we envisioned this problem. We built our AMM to support multiple assets, multiple greater than 2, anywhere from 2 to 8. And then you have a very dynamic range of granularity for weight. So you could do like an 80-20 pool, 33, 33, 33, whatever you want. So we think there's definitely room for outside of these 50-50 pools. For meme coins, there are, maybe some demand for an 80-20. And we definitely believe in our ability to kind of capture that demand for meme coins. So I think DeepBook is going to kind of grow on the blue chip side, and then there's going to be demand for meme coins outside of DeepBook, and we're kind of well suited to capture that.
Yeah, I want to touch on that point a little bit more. I think you made a great point about the Claude model sort of tying into those highly liquid assets, but then pointing out that longer tail assets, meme coins as an example, as like an opportunity to capture there is. I think you sort of talked a little bit about like the AMM designs there specifically. Are there any other reasons that like Aftermath specifically is well positioned over other like AMM dexes in the space to capture that like meme coin or other long tail asset activity?
I think I think we've been here for a while, so there's like um, everyone's they know who we are. We're very close with a lot of the communities on Suite. So there's that aspect of the social side, which I think we are, uh, we're well suited to capture from that point of view. And then from the technical side, most other AMMs on SUI, I believe every other AMM now has either they launched with the CLMM or they've launched with a, UniV2 and then now upgraded to a UniV3. And maybe they're in this hybrid position where they're running both, but their focus going forward is on the UniV3. I think we're still the only AMM who hasn't gone that approach. We really took inspiration from like Curve or Balancer with these multi-asset, kind of more niche, to an extent more niche, but more niche use cases out of just the dominant. We really wanted to solve this one problem, and I think that problem itself, kind of the granularity you have with weights, the ability to then, if you want to have like a meme index on Aftermath, you can. I think there's a lot of use cases, especially for meme coins, that we're well suited to capture. So I think from the technical side, from the social side, like we are in a really good position to capture that. And then you have the DEX aggregator that taps on top of it, and it just makes trading meme coins that are on Aftermath much easier if you're doing it through Aftermath already.
Perfect. Moving a bit away from the dexes, I want to ask about your liquid staking token. So firstly, I want to ask, you guys did SIP6, or at least you proposed it or you worked on it. I kind of want to understand what the process of that is like, and what's the process of, because you're very new to the chain, and the chain itself is also very new.
Yeah.
You're not new to the chain. You're one of the old guards on a new chain. So I want to understand what that process looked like of you implementing something that many might consider semi-basic to to an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And do you have plans to incorporate other rewards into afSUI, potentially through MEV, which is something you touched upon earlier as well?
Yeah. Yeah, so good question. So around SIP6, you're mainly wondering what is the SIP process, or more
Yeah.
so on the liquid staking side. Yeah,
Both.
yeah, both. Okay. Yeah, for those who are unaware, SIP6, it was the first SIP to be proposed and then go to the final implementation side, like the full life cycle of the SIP process, and then roll out on testnet and mainnet. And it didn't necessarily allow liquid staking. Liquid staking was possible beforehand, which I'll get into, but it allowed a very ideal version of liquid staking, a very permissionless, decentralized version of liquid staking. Um, uh, I won't get into the weeds of the reason we proposed it. There, at the crux of it, like at the center of that, there was a like a one-line change that kind of allowed this thing, and it's very inherent to move. But I won't get into the too technical side of things. But before that, you had to have a very centralized approach if you wanted liquid staking, which removed the ability for atomicity or composability on top of it. If you wanted to stake, your underlying SWI that you're staking had to go to a centralized address, one address, and it held it. And then there had to be some off-chain infrastructure that kind of observed your stake and transfer a stake to that address, and then it would, mint the afSUI for you, which is like you say that, and it's almost kind of funny how bad that design is. That's what was possible before SIP6. SIP6 allowed all of that, centralized off-chain infrastructure to then occur on-chain. So instead of having the centralized address, you then had some contract on-chain, some vault, whatever you want to call it. For us, we call it a vault, but that's what's holding the SWI. That's kind of what you expect. It's holding the stake SWI, and it's responsible for then minting the AFSWI for you. So very, in that regard, it's very decentralized. And then with our LSD model for AFSWI, we also didn't want some kind of whitelisted set of validators, as you see with other liquid staking derivatives. We wanted, if you were at least in the active validator set, we wanted someone to have the ability to like choose you from a dropdown. So very permissionless in that sense. Even though like we run our own validator, we were Genesis validator. We just wanted to allow anyone to stake to whoever they wanted. Maybe there's a validator today, or maybe they join tomorrow. We still want them to have the ability to get delegation through AFSUI. So yeah, the SIP process was fairly simple. By the time we proposed it, it was something that like everyone, we had kind of made noise about this, and everyone kind of knew it was coming, and was aware of the benefits. So it was a fairly simple process once we proposed it to then move it to throughout each of the like individual life cycle phases of the SIP process. It eventually got fast tracked. So I forget the actual like time to completion from when we started it to actual implementation and rollout, but it was like a matter of weeks, a few weeks, I think.
Perfect. And with the actual design of afSUI, do you guys, I guess maybe before this, I want to ask a bit about how different is MEV and SUI compared to Solana and Ethereum, and what have you guys been looking into in
Yeah,
terms of MEV and aftermath finance, and then maybe we can talk about the LST potentially.
sure. Yeah. I forget you. I will touch on that later question of additional rewards, etc. Yeah, so MEV on SWI, it's been I wouldn't say overlooked, but there's just not a lot of people looking into primarily like DAG-based consensus. A lot of research is on single leader styles of consensus. Ethereum has a large amount of research happening. Solana is starting to get large amount of research. There's not a lot of research, maybe broad research. There's a lot of research being proposed for DAG-based consensus, but it's primarily from the teams who are actively building on SWI or Aptos. So it's I would say it's kind of been overlooked. Like maybe everyone's been wondering about it, and no one's really had the answers. So it's been something we've been looking into since our beginning on SWI, and it's really an exciting time to look into it, and people are wondering about it. But the large thing is, SWI is this DAG, and what does that mean composed or compared to Ethereum or Solana? On these other chains, you have a single leader design where there's one individual validator who's responsible for aggregating transactions, maybe proposing the order of transactions, and then execution and all of that. However that happens, however they get transactions, whatever, like at the core of it, you have a single leader who's responsible. On SWI, it's very different. You have this DAG process where, let's say there's 100 validators. I think there's 108 today, but let's just stick to 100. SWI kind of progresses in a series of rounds where every round, every validator, unless they're down for whatever reason, but let's say they're not, every validator is proposing a block. So 100 blocks are proposed in a round. each block includes transactions. There could be, duplicated transactions throughout these blocks if a user sends to multiple validators at once. And then additional to those transactions that are included, they also link to their blocks from the previous round. And it's like that backlinking that then creates this DAG structure. And then also during every round, a series of those blocks are selected to be leader blocks, and then they are voted on to be committed. And when you commit a block for a round, you also commit the uncommitted portions of its history. So that is kind of the core difference. You have the idea of a block on Ethereum or Solana is very different than an idea of a block on Sui. And if I were to generalize the idea of a block on another chain, I would say it's a portion of state that's being committed, right? You have everything down to the specific order of transactions. You know how to execute it. Like you're committing a linear sequence of transactions. And then from there, you can execute it in parallel if you're allowed to, whatever. But you have a linear sequence of transactions. On Sui, the blocks themselves that are being proposed every round, that's not necessarily exactly what's being committed. It's that when you commit a block, you're committing itself plus its a portion of its causal history. So that history is then, and then the leader block is then reordered from some deterministic ordering rule, and then you're produced this linear sequence of blocks, and then again from there, that's what's being committed. So that is kind of the idea of an equivalent block to another chain. But due to that reordering rule across the history, you're allowed to have scenarios where a leader includes a transaction. Maybe one of its parents, from the previous round includes a transaction. The leader transaction can happen before the parent's transaction, and that's just kind of inherent to this DAG structure due to the way that commits occur. Which is very nuanced and maybe sounds weird to begin with, but I think it revolves around kind of changing your concept of what a block is and how to think of a block on Sui versus how to think of a block on another single leader based chain, which produces kind of a weird result for MEV. Largely, MEV is still possible on Sui. You just have different types of MEV that can be captured. I guess mechanisms for capturing MEV, like sandwiching is still possible. Just the way that you pull it off is a bit different. Every type of MEV that you'd expect from another chain, whether it's arbitrage, liquidations, whatever, CEX, DEX, ARBs, top block, whatever types of MEV, it's still possible on the DAG. It's just different in terms of how you are able to actually capture it and what you have to do to pull that off. And then the last thing I'll kind of mention with these DAGs is that there's no public mempool. So that also kind of throws a wrench into how you could pull off MEV on Sui. So today it's very limited to if I send a transaction, people who can capture MEV from that, it's very limited to those who are in the life cycle. So I'm going to send to a full node. Maybe the full node can do something to the transaction, or the full node sends to a series of validators. Those validators can try to do something to it, right? But that's a very minimal set because you don't have this public mempool. So essentially, you do have like every transaction occurs through private order flow. You could think of it that way.
That's interesting. I kind of wanted to ask about, because oftentimes we hear that high throughput chains, they have less, not MEV, but they have less LVR and impermanent loss, especially like specifically around AMMs and liquidity pools. So that is obviously the same for Sui because it has high throughput and short block times. But is there anything else, like you mentioned that it's just differently executed on, like MEV is just different on Sui, like it's the same types but different execution? Can you kind of dive more deeply into that?
Yeah. So the most important reason for why it's different on Sui is that I said when you commit there's a leader block in a round, the validators vote on if they're going to actually commit that block or not. Let's say they do, then they commit that plus its history, and then they take that history plus the leader block, reorder it off of some deterministic ordering rule, and then they produce some linear sequence of transactions. It's that, reordering that is very important for how you can capture MEV. So today it's by gas price. You can imagine tomorrow it changes by something else, but you have a sequence of blocks across rounds. You kind of reorder those blocks and then the individual transactions by gas price from top to least. And then you have a linear sequence of transactions. And that is then sent, that's what's committed and that's what's sent to the execution engine. And then there's some other things that happen during the execution engine that can affect this. But I think that deterministic rule is kind of the most important thing. And that's where you can get, let's say when a validator produces a block, just during a round, they produce one block. Maybe there's a sandwich opportunity that they're trying to capture. But then when it comes time to deterministically reorder the transactions of the history, that sandwich opportunity might just be completely reordered. If they're unaware of this deterministic reordering and they're not aware of, I need to order by gas price, you could completely have that sandwich opportunity completely reordered. And it's just entirely dependent on today, the gas price of all the other transactions that are included in the history, what transactions are, or what blocks are uncommitted from the history. So it becomes very probabilistic on SWI because maybe at any given point, you don't know which blocks in my history are going to be committed before my block is committed, etc. So I mentioned also that, every round, multiple validators blocks can then be decided to be a leader, and there's like a linear sequence of leaders in a round. It's also very dependent on that because you would imagine two leaders in one round would have a large overlap of blocks that they linked to in the previous round. If I'm the second leader that round and I'm trying to capture some MEV off of a block in the previous round, maybe it's being committed by a leader before me in the same round. So then they're the ones who's able to kind of capture the MEV and not me. So it is very probabilistic off of the current state of what I see versus what another validator sees. And then is that validator going to be committed before I am? There's a high degree for all of this, high degree of likelihood that a validator is going to be committed today on SWI at least, or their block is going to be committed. But it's very probabilistic, and it's very inherent to that deterministic reordering rule.
Makes a lot of sense. You went pretty deep into the kind of breakdown there. I guess if we can shift a little bit then, we're talking a little bit about how SWI MEV is a little bit different from other ecosystems. What about the DevX experience? I think you kind of alluded to this a little bit right at the beginning. How does the SWI DevX experience compare to other ecosystems, especially if you have experience building on the EVM or in Solana? If you have any specific kind of examples of that, or just as builders on SWI in general, like what are your thoughts here?
Yeah. So this is definitely something that is, it's talked about a lot with SWI is the developer experience. And I think that's a very compelling reason. If I was building on another chain, I don't know if it would be, that alone would be compelling enough to get me to like completely rewrite my stack to then support SWI, right? But as you start looking beyond I don't know, there's less than 40,000 developers across all of Web3. I forget the exact number, like 36 or something like that. But if you start looking to the broader audience, that is a very compelling reason. If I'm going to enter Web3 for the first time, as a developer, as a Web2 developer, I do have expectations for, infrastructure and, the entire stack that I'm looking for an ecosystem. And when it comes to the language itself, like the developer experience is kind of that much better on SWI. So I do see it as being a reason for new developers to choose SWI over other ecosystems. And there's a lot you could talk about. To give a few examples, I already kind of touched on the object-centric data model and how that affects security, or I guess I didn't touch security too much, but how it affects congestion and the ability to have transactions execute in parallel. That is a very good selling piece for building high throughput applications on SWI. There's another feature I'll talk about, programmable transaction blocks, or just P2Bs as I'll call them. This is a huge selling point for building on SWI. And I think our DEX aggregator, and just in general, like the idea of a DEX aggregator, is like the poster child product to visualize how this is so impactful. So with all these DEX aggregators, you're chaining together a series of swaps from different AMMs or spot liquidity venues. At the time of when you're trying to find a route, you don't really want a limitation on, the number of, um, say when you start a route, you're going to split your initial coin into, 50%, and that's going to go through an individual route, and then 30%, and then 20%, or whatever arbitrary amounts. But you want to then split it to be more capital efficient. And then each of those routes, you don't want to limit for the number of individual trades, like the length of the route. You don't want to limit there. With P2Bs, you're able to completely off-chain after you've, kind of figured out through your algorithm, you figured out the route that you're going to take. You're able to chain together on-chain function calls. So maybe I'm swapping at some DEX on chain, and then I can physically take the output of that, which if it's a swap, the output is going to be the output coin, and I can take that and use that as input for another function, so another swap, and I can keep doing that. You know, there's some limit, some like arbitrary limits, much higher than you would actually need to do in practice, like 10,000 or not 10,000, like 1,000 or 2,000 different function calls. But in theory, I can do any amount of swaps that I want on chain. And it's this ability to kind of chain together. And this is extremely impactful, and allows us to build something like the DEX aggregator. But it allows us kind of across the board for all of our products. If there's any number of like dynamic transactions that I need to do under the hood, P2Bs allow you to do that in one atomic, transaction itself. So let's say the lack of this, when we first started building on SWI, we didn't have this. So with our DEX aggregator, if you were doing, 16 individual swaps, you would get a swap. You get like your wallet pop-up, you would click accept, then a second one would come up, and that would happen 16 times. Like that is like obviously terrible UX. But P2Bs, this allows you to do it in one atomic transaction. Maybe on that 15th swap, you have some slippage error, goes out of bounds. You'd want to fail and then revert to the beginning of the state of the beginning of the first trade. With P2Bs, that's possible. Without P2Bs, you're on that 15th wallet pop-up, you click accept, it fails, and then you're stuck with some random coin. In theory, some random coin. So P2Bs allow you to do atomic composability at a different level compared to other chains. The object ownership, or the object-centric data model, kind of the inherent ownership around that allows you to kind of build very high throughput applications due to the way you access these different objects on chain. And there's also a lot of security benefits around this object-centric data model, and that if I own an object, only I can interact with that object. So the the coins in my wallet, only I can interact with that, which is a very strong guarantee to have, and that happens, it's kind of baked into um, the bytecode verifier itself. So it's like very low level. You have all these different benefits. These features for building on screen, they're all built in at the lowest level you can have it. There's a very strong sense of safety of guarantees you can have.
That makes sense. That was a good, I think, overview of some different functions experiences here that are beneficial for potential users of SWI and developers. With that in mind, you're building on SWI. How do you see SWI as like an ecosystem or a chain capture more market share, both for developers and for users, like within this broader ecosystem of crypto and blockchain adoption? Like, how does SWI compete? Do these different features from a DevX perspective that lead to benefits on the user side? Is that part of it, or what are, how do you see SWI continuing to grow from here?
Yeah, um, yeah, it's a great question. So I'll focus on developers first, and then I think a lot of the effort that's put there will also, in the long run, bring more users. I think first, you need to just attract more developers. You need more interesting use cases that only SWI can provide. Um, so you need to first just attract the developer set, and I think they've done a fairly good job there, just across the board. And ourselves included, we've been able to attract developers from both Solana or Ethereum and kind of onboard them into SWI, very like one-on-one. We've done a lot of that, and it's interesting getting their viewpoints, and they kind of see the benefits too, and they're always like, this is, it's so easy to write and move and all that. That's beside the point. But first, you need to subtract the developer set, and I think that's been the focus primarily. And then with that, you get new use cases that are being built on SWE, and then with that, you get the users that come, and we're very much in that first phase. But I think you need to see more innovations on SWE in terms of the. I'm just going to focus on DeFi in particular because that's kind of the vertical that I live in. Um, but you just need to see more innovations of what's possible on SWE. Um, so we're starting to see that to an extent, some like diversity within the applications on SWE. I think there still needs to be more diversity. You're starting to see more coins, whether it's blue chip coins, whether it's meme coins. You're starting to see more coins on SWE, which is good, and that's been able to attract some of that the meme coin hype of Solana. We've been able to get some of that over on SWE, and I think it's going to continue to grow and attract a different set of users. But still beyond that, you still need more diverse applications. So I think our perps, I think that is going to be something that drives a lot of users over to SWE. It's going to be a new, exciting, innovating product that's launched on SWE. I think also outside of that, so we've touched on a bit, the MEV capabilities on SWE. So we've been doing a lot of work there. If you zone in specifically on maybe some market makers, but searchers or some of these more like highly skilled technical people who want to, from that side of things, they want to interface with SWE, but there's some of the infra that's not available there. We are working a lot on that day to day. So we're going to be able to onboard physically. A lot of these searchers who spend a lot of their time on Solana these days, or maybe on some L2s. But we've been interfacing a lot with them and slowly getting them onboarded. And I think there's a lot of room there. But again, it just kind of comes down to first you need to bring the developers, but then you need to build new and exciting, innovating use cases. And in some cases, just some infra that you expect, whether you're a searcher or whether you're a user or a developer. There's some infra that needs to be there, and we're still kind of seeing a lot of that be built out. And I think in part we're building a lot of that out, but a lot of teams on SWE are also building that out, or Mistin themselves are building that out.
Great points. Maybe diving back into you guys more specifically again. How has, I guess for Aftermath specifically, how has growth been for you guys? Obviously, we've seen some growth of the SWE ecosystem lately. There's been some excitement there. Is there anything that you guys as a team, looking back over the past maybe 6 months, would have done differently? Just looking back at the path that you've had, getting to here now, and seeing the kind of relative increase in excitement around SWE and the activity.
Yeah, well, so I mean, if I could have spoke to myself 6 months ago, I would have said buy more SWE. We held quite a lot of SWE, but I would have said buy even more. Um, um, what would we have done differently? To be honest, I kind of like our journey throughout SWE. I think if I could have talked to myself 2 years ago, there are aspects that have changed quite fundamentally on SWE, and maybe we would have launched with other products first. But 6 months ago, I think I'm fairly happy. I like our growth. I think SWE slowly, the price has been going up. We've been getting more users just on SWE in general. And I think Aftermath has been able to capture a lot of that and build quite a strong community. And if you kind of zoom out a little bit beyond the 6 months, you do have the launch of our eggs. And I think we were like really pleased with the launch of that and, the ability to kind of, before that, you see a community through Discord numbers, through likes or retweets on Twitter, but then you launch an NFT, you can kind of pretty quickly see the community you've built, and then even since then, that was January or February of this year, I forget exactly which month. SWE's continued to grow since then. It's built quite a large community since then, and we still get people to this day talking about eggs, which is fairly exciting. But yeah, I would say we're very happy with the community we've built, and fairly happy with kind of our roadmap on SWE and what we've done and kind of the order we've done to get to where we're at today.
I need to ask about the eggs. Kevin, what's the plan with the eggs, and what are we gonna do with them? What should I do with my eggs? Is I guess the main question that I have.
You should hold it. That's probably as much as I can say. I will say what's kind of funny is maybe it's bearish, maybe it's not. We had like this whole roadmap planned out for the eggs. and then we launched them, and people loved the eggs. So we kind of wanted to stick with the eggs for a bit longer. I think there's more. It's a funnier community, I would say, but there's more memeable content you can create around an egg, and we were not anticipating that in the slightest. And then we launched the eggs. They sold out within, I think, 6 hours. And then from there, as soon as we launched them, we had um, I don't know, every day, like, people are creating memes. Still to this day, we have people creating memes around the eggs, and it's really fun to see.
Perfect. I guess just to wrap things up, what's coming up for you guys over the next 6 to 12 months? What are you most excited about?
Yeah. So lots changing on SUI itself, and we're kind of waiting for some of those changes to launch some of our products. In the longer term of the maybe 4 months to a year, you'll see the launch of what we've been working on the MEV side, and kind of iterating there, and kind of attracting clients, whether it's validators or researchers or et cetera. That's primarily going to be our focus. Between those two is kind of how the team split today. And then you have some other smaller features that we'll launch, but I think the big flashy products, those are both it. You'll see, definitely well within that time frame, you'll see the launch of perps on testnet and then roll out on mainnet, and then you'll see kind of the initial release of what we've been doing on the MEV side, and then it'll continue to evolve and become more of just like an ecosystem, I'd say.
Perfect. And where should our listeners go to find out more about Aftermath, your thoughts on MEV, the eggs?
Yeah, there's yeah, so we're building quite a bit, so there's a lot you could do to kind of stay informed. We've got a Discord. I'd always recommend that. We have our Twitter, Aftermath Phi. I'd recommend following that. I have my Twitter, I think Kevin Aftermath. We have an intern. I'd recommend following that. That kind of gets the general day-to-day around what we're building. If you want thoughts around MEV, I just released something called Concurrent Research. I think it's Twitter's Concurrent XYZ. I'd recommend following that. Hopefully, we'll be releasing more things about SUI MEV and DAG MEV and all that in the near future. So I definitely keep an eye out on kind of all those socials.
Perfect. Danny, do you have anything you want to tell Kevin before we thank him?
I think it was great. Kevin went really deep on MEV, on DAGs, and on SUI, and Aftermath, of course.
It's good. There isn't that much content out there for SUI or Aptos MEV, so like DAG MEV. So it's good. People are gonna we're gonna nerd snipe a bunch of people.
I hope so, yeah. Actually, within the past 2 weeks, there's been a lot of research, not around MEV on DAGs, but just a lot of DAG-based research has been proposed, primarily from the Miston side. It's like one of their researchers is busting out a lot of papers.
Kevin, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Glad to have you on.